Chapter 1. The Awakening. Selina walked home through the narrow, fog-filled streets of her small town, the autumn wind biting at her skin. The ancient clock tower in the town square struck midnight, the chimes echoing eerily in the silence. The streets were deserted, as if the town itself knew to fear the darkness. She adjusted the strap of her worn leather bag, her heart heavy with the memory of her family. Just 3 months ago, her world had been torn apart when her younger sister Lily disappeared. The authorities claimed it was just another runaway, but Selina knew better. People had been vanishing for years, always under the same strange circumstances. No signs of struggle, no trace of their whereabouts. Her instincts told her to keep moving, but something made her stop. The hairs on the back of her neck stood up as she felt a presence nearby. Slowly, she turned, her piercing green eyes scanning the shadows. That's when she saw him, a man, or at least what looked like a man, standing under a flickering street lamp. His features were unnaturally sharp, his pale skin almost glowing under the dim light. His crimson eyes locked onto hers, and for a moment she felt paralyzed. He smiled, revealing two gleaming fangs. Selina's breath caught in her throat. The legends she'd heard as a child, stories of creatures that drank the blood of the living, flooded her mind. Vampires weren't just myths, they were real. And now one of them was standing mere feet away from her. The vampire moved, faster than her eyes could follow, appearing inches from her in the blink of an eye. "You smell delicious," he murmured, his voice smooth as silk but dripping with menace. Selina's survival instincts kicked in. Without thinking, she swung her bag at him, but the vampire caught it effortlessly, his strength overwhelming. His other hand shot out, gripping her wrist in a vice-like hold. "You're not like the others," he said, his head tilting as he studied her. "There's something different about you." Selina gritted her teeth, refusing to show fear. She felt a strange heat rising within her, a fire she couldn't explain. Before the vampire could act further, the sound of footsteps echoed from the alley. A flash of silver streaked through the air, striking the vampire in the chest. He howled in pain and released Selina, stumbling back as the silver dagger embedded in his flesh began to burn. "Get away from her," a deep voice commanded. Selina turned to see a man dressed in a long coat, his face partially obscured by the shadow of his hood. He carried a crossbow in one hand and another silver dagger in the other. The vampire snarled, but the sight of the man seemed to unsettle him. "This isn't over," the vampire hissed, his crimson eyes narrowing before he vanished into the darkness. Selina stared at the stranger, her heart pounding. "Who are you?" she demanded, still trying to catch her breath. "My name is Victor," the man said, lowering his weapons. "And if you want to survive, you need to come with me. They'll be back for you." Selina hesitated, but she couldn't deny the truth in his words. Something about her had drawn the vampire's attention, and she needed answers. Reluctantly, she followed Victor as he led her through the maze of alleys, his presence both intimidating and reassuring. They entered a small, hidden building on the outskirts of town. Inside, it was filled with ancient books, weapons, and strange artifacts. Victor wasted no time. "You've been marked," he said grimly. "That vampire, he's part of a clan that has been preying on this town for centuries. They've sensed something in you, something that makes you a threat to them." Selina's head spun. "What are you talking about? I'm just ordinary." Victor shook his head. You're far from ordinary. There's a power inside you, one that even you don't fully understand yet. And if you don't learn to harness it, they will destroy you and everyone you care about. Selina clenched her fists, anger bubbling beneath the surface. They took my sister, she said, her voice trembling. If what you're saying is true, I'm going to make them pay. Victor nodded, a faint smile playing at his lips. Good, but vengeance alone won't be enough. If you want to fight them, you'll need to train, and fast. The vampires are already hunting you. Selina felt a surge of determination. She didn't fully understand what was happening to her, but she knew one thing for certain. She wouldn't let the vampires destroy her family, or anyone else. As the first light of dawn broke through the window, Selina stood in the middle of Victor's lair, her heart steeled for the battles to come. This was just the beginning of her fight against the darkness. Chapter 2. The Blood Moon's Warning. Selina stood in Victor's lair, her mind racing as she tried to make sense of everything she'd just learned. The smell of old parchment and leather filled the air, and the flickering candles cast long shadows across the room. Ancient maps and symbols covered the walls, and weapons of every kind were neatly arranged on racks. Victor approached her, his expression serious. Before you can fight them, you need to understand what you're up against. He picked up a thick, weathered book from a nearby table and flipped it open to an illustration of a crimson moon. The Blood Clan, Victor began, pointing to the image of a twisted emblem etched beneath the moon. They're one of the oldest vampire clans in existence, ruthless, cunning, and powerful. They've been feeding on the people of this town for generations, using the shadows to stay hidden. Selina's green eyes narrowed as she studied the page. Why hasn't anyone stopped them? Why has everyone let this go on for so long? Victor sighed, closing the book with a heavy thud. Most people don't even know they exist. The vampires are careful, picking their victims one by one, leaving no trace behind, and those who do know are too afraid to fight back. Selina clenched her fists, the memory of her sister's disappearance burning like a fresh wound. I'm not afraid of them, she said, her voice firm. They took my sister, and I'm going to make sure they regret it. Victor studied her for a moment, then nodded. Good, but bravery won't be enough. You'll need to learn how to fight and how to survive. He led her to a corner of the room where a variety of weapons were displayed. These are your tools, he said, picking up a sleek silver blade. Silver is deadly to vampires. So are holy water and sunlight, though the older ones have learned to resist the light to some degree. Selina took the blade from him, its weight unfamiliar in her hand. And what about whatever it is you think I have inside me? She asked, glancing at him. Victor's expression darkened. That's something we'll need to figure out. The fact that a vampire marked you means they sensed something unique about you. It could be latent power, or it could be something else entirely. For now, you need to focus on staying alive. The next few days passed in a blur of training. Victor pushed Selina to her limits, teaching her how to wield a sword, how to aim a crossbow, and how to move silently through the shadows. Every muscle in her body ached, but she refused to give up. The image of her sister's face and the memory of the vampire's fangs were enough to fuel her determination. One evening, as the sun dipped below the horizon, Victor called her over to a table covered in ancient scrolls. There's something you need to see, he said, unrolling one of the scrolls. It depicted a prophecy, written in a language Selina couldn't understand. "What is this?" she asked, leaning closer. "It's an ancient warning," Victor explained. "The blood moon is rising soon, a rare event that only happens once every century. During the blood moon, the vampire's power reaches its peak, and the Blood Clan will perform a ritual to solidify their dominance. If they succeed, they'll be unstoppable." Selina's stomach tightened. "And let me guess, they need this ritual to involve people?" Victor nodded grimly. "Human sacrifices, many of them." Selina felt a surge of anger. "Then we can't let them succeed. We need to stop them before it's too late." Victor hesitated, his gaze heavy. "It won't be easy. The Blood Clan's leader, Lord Malachar, is one of the most powerful vampires in existence. He's centuries old, and his power is unlike anything you've faced. If we're going to stop him, we'll need to find his lair and destroy the clan before the blood moon reaches its peak." Selina's heart pounded as the weight of their task sank in, but she refused to back down. "Then we find the lair, we stop the ritual, and we kill Malachar." Victor smiled faintly, a glimmer of respect in his eyes. "You're braver than most hunters I've trained, but bravery won't mean much if you're not prepared." That night, Selina dreamed of blood-red skies and shadowy figures with glowing eyes. She stood in the middle of the chaos, a silver sword in her hand, her sister's voice calling out to her from the darkness. When she woke, the first rays of dawn were breaking through the windows. Victor was already preparing for their mission, sharpening weapons and gathering supplies. "We leave tonight," he said without looking up. "The Blood Clan won't wait for us, and the ritual begins tomorrow." Selina nodded, determination hardening her resolve. For the first time since her sister's disappearance, she felt a spark of hope. She wasn't just fighting for her family. She was fighting to end the vampire's reign of terror once and for all. But deep down, she knew the battle ahead would test her in ways she couldn't yet imagine. Chapter 3. Into the Shadows. As night fell, Selina and Victor moved silently through the dense forest that bordered the town. The pale moonlight filtered through the trees, casting ghostly patterns on the ground. Every sound seemed amplified, the rustling of leaves, the hoot of an owl, the snap of a twig beneath Selina's boot. Her grip on the silver sword tightened as her heart pounded with a mix of fear and anticipation. Victor led the way, his movements precise and calculated. He held a crossbow in one hand, loaded with silver-tipped bolts, and his eyes scanned the darkness with the focus of a seasoned hunter. "Stay close," he whispered, his voice barely audible. "The lair isn't far, but the forest is crawling with their scouts." Selina nodded, her jaw set with determination. Her training had prepared her for this moment, but doubt lingered in the back of her mind. Could she really face the creatures that had haunted her dreams? Would she be able to find her sister and survive? The path grew narrower, the trees closing in around them like silent sentinels. The air grew colder, and an unnatural stillness settled over the forest. Victor stopped suddenly, raising a hand to signal her to freeze. Ahead of them, a figure emerged from the shadows. It was a vampire, his pale face twisted into a sinister grin. His crimson eyes glowed in the darkness, and his fangs gleamed as he stepped closer. "Well, well," the vampire hissed, his voice dripping with malice. "Fresh prey delivered straight to our doorstep." Victor didn't hesitate. He raised his crossbow and fired, the silver bolt whistling through the air. The vampire dodged with inhuman speed, lunging toward them with a snarl. Selina's instincts kicked in. She swung her sword, the blade catching the vampire's arm and slicing through it with ease. The creature howled in pain, clutching the stump as blackened blood oozed from the wound. "Keep moving," Victor shouted, reloading his crossbow. They didn't wait to see if the vampire would recover. The pair sprinted deeper into the forest, the sounds of pursuit echoing behind them. More vampires were closing in, their guttural growls filling the air. Finally, they reached a clearing where an ancient stone ruin stood. The structure was crumbling, overgrown with vines, but its dark entrance yawned open like the mouth of a beast. Selina felt a chill run down her spine. "This is it," Victor said, his voice grim. "The Blood Clan's lair." The moment they stepped inside, the air grew heavier, thick with the stench of decay and damp stone. The walls were lined with faded carvings depicting ancient battles and rituals, and the faint sound of chanting echoed from deep within. Selina's grip on her sword tightened as she followed Victor through the labyrinthine corridors. The flickering torchlight cast eerie shadows on the walls, and every step felt like it brought them closer to the heart of darkness. They passed a large chamber filled with cages, and Selina's breath caught when she saw the people inside. Emaciated and pale, their eyes filled with terror, they huddled together as if trying to escape an unseen nightmare. "We'll come back for them," Victor said, placing a hand on Selina's shoulder to keep her moving. "The ritual chamber is ahead." Selina nodded, her resolve hardening. They couldn't afford to waste time. As they entered the next chamber, they were met with a horrifying sight. At the center of the room stood an altar, carved from black stone, its surface stained with blood. Surrounding it were robed figures chanting in an ancient guttural language. At the head of the group stood Lord Malachar. His presence was overwhelming, his crimson eyes glowing with malevolence. His towering figure was draped in dark armor, and his long silver hair framed a face that was both regal and monstrous. Selina's heart pounded as Malachar's gaze shifted to her. His lips curled into a cruel smile. "Ah, the marked one," he said, his voice deep and commanding. "I've been expecting you." Victor stepped forward, raising his crossbow. "Your reign ends tonight, Malachar." The vampire lord laughed, the sound echoing through the chamber. "Foolish hunter, you think you can stop what has been set in motion for centuries? The blood moon rises, and with it, my power will become absolute." Selina felt a surge of anger. "You took my sister," she shouted, stepping beside Victor. "I'm not leaving here without her." Malachar's smile widened. "Ah, yes, the girl. She's quite special, just like you." He gestured to one of the robed figures who stepped aside to reveal a small cage at the edge of the room. Inside was Lily, her face pale but alive. "Lily!" Selina cried, her heart breaking at the sight of her sister. "Take her if you can," Malachar said, his voice dripping with mockery. "But you'll have to get through me first." With that, he raised his hand, and the robed figures transformed into snarling vampires, their fangs bared as they lunged toward Selina and Victor. "Stay focused!" Victor shouted, firing his crossbow and taking down one of the creatures. Selina raised her sword, the weight of her mission crashing down on her. She couldn't afford to fail, not when her sister's life and countless others depended on her. As the vampires closed in, she prepared to face the fight of her life. Chapter 4. The Blood Ritual. The chamber was alive with tension, the air thick with the scent of blood and the unmistakable presence of death. Selina stood at the edge of the altar room, her hand gripping her sword tightly, eyes fixed on her sister Lily, locked away in the cage. The chants of the vampires grew louder, and Malakar's voice rumbled like thunder, signaling the final moments before the ritual began. Victor moved to her side, his crossbow ready, eyes scanning the robed vampires surrounding them. The night had turned into a nightmare, and Selina could feel her heart pounding against her ribs. The full weight of the task ahead pressed down on her. She wasn't just fighting for her own survival anymore, but for the lives of everyone in this cursed town, especially Lily. "They'll make their move soon," Victor whispered, his voice sharp. "We need to act fast, or they'll complete the ritual." The robed figures around the altar continued their chants, their voices rising in pitch. Lord Malakar stood at the center, his crimson eyes locked on Selina, a wicked grin playing at the edges of his mouth. "You're brave, girl," he sneered, "but that won't save you. The blood moon is upon us, and you're too late to stop it." Selina's grip on her sword tightened as she stepped forward, her eyes never leaving Malakar. She felt a surge of something deep within her, a burning energy that she didn't fully understand yet, but instinctively knew was her only hope. Victor shot a bolt at one of the vampires, taking down one of the robed figures with a sharp cry. The vampire crumpled to the ground, but it was clear there were more, and they weren't going to make it easy for them. Malakar's voice echoed through the chamber. "You're playing a dangerous game, Hunter, but it's over now." With a swift motion, Malakar raised his hands, and the vampires in the room surged forward. Selina moved without thinking, her body reacting to the threat as she dodged the first attacker and struck with precision, her silver sword cutting through the vampire's flesh. The creature fell to the ground, but there were more closing in from every angle. Victor fought beside her, his crossbow clicking with deadly efficiency, but the vampires kept coming, their speed and strength overwhelming. The room was filled with the clash of steel and the cries of the undead, the battle growing more intense with each passing second. Malakar watched, his eyes glowing with dark amusement. "You're not fast enough, Selina," he taunted. "The ritual is already in motion." Selina turned her head briefly, her gaze locking on the cage where Lily remained, unconscious but breathing. She had to get to her, but the vampires were relentless, closing in on every side. Her heart pounded in her chest, but a voice inside told her she couldn't let fear control her. In that moment, a spark of something she couldn't explain ignited deep within her. A rush of energy flooded her veins, and before she even realized it, she moved with a newfound power. She swung her sword, cutting down another vampire with ease, the silver blade shining in the dim light. The vampires recoiled at the sight, momentarily stunned by the force of her attack. Victor noticed the change in her and shot her a look of approval. "That's it, Selina. Tap into it. The power is in you. Use it." Malakar's grin faltered as he watched Selina's transformation. "No, you're not supposed to have this power," he hissed. But it was too late. Selina could feel the blood rushing through her, the energy building as she pressed forward. She reached the cage where Lily was trapped, the key to the lock within her grasp. With one swift motion, she unlocked the door and pulled her sister out of the cage, her arms trembling as she held her. "Lily, Wake up, it's me. You're safe now, Selina whispered urgently, brushing the hair from her sister's face. Lily's eyes fluttered open, confusion clouding her gaze. Selina, what's happening? Where are we? We're leaving. Stay close, Selina said, her voice firm as she helped her sister stand. She could feel Malakar's presence growing stronger, his fury palpable in the air. Behind her, Victor was holding off the remaining vampires. But Selina knew they had little time left. The ritual had already begun, and the blood moon was nearing its peak. They had to stop it now, or everything they'd fought for would be lost. Malakar stepped forward, his presence overwhelming, his eyes fixed on Selina. You think you can stop me? You think you can defy fate? His voice was like a dark storm, the power in his words seeping into the very walls of the lair. I'm not afraid of you, Selina said, her voice steady. She turned to Victor. We need to destroy the altar. It's the only way to stop the ritual. Victor nodded, his face grim. I'll cover you. Get to the altar, now. Selina didn't hesitate. She turned, rushing toward the altar, sword raised. As she moved, she felt the weight of the world on her shoulders. This was her fight. The Blood Clan had taken everything from her, but now she had the chance to take it all back. Malakar reached out, his hand crackling with dark energy as he prepared to strike. But Selina was faster. She swung her sword, aiming directly for the heart of the altar. The blade collided with the black stone, sending a shockwave of energy through the chamber. The altar cracked, and the air seemed to explode with force. Malakar let out a screech of rage, but before he could react, Selina plunged the sword into the altar's center. A burst of light erupted from the stone, blinding everyone in the room. The vampires howled as the dark magic dissipated, their power vanishing with the destruction of the altar. The chanting stopped, and the oppressive air lifted. The blood moon, once ominously bright in the sky above, began to fade, its power waning. Selina stood, panting, her heart racing as the dust settled. Malakar, weakened and enraged, staggered back, his once unshakable confidence shattered. This isn't the end, he growled, retreating into the shadows. You may have won this battle, but the war is far from over. Selina didn't respond. Her eyes remained locked on Lily, who was still dazed but safe in her arms. For now, the threat had been defeated, but Selina knew this was just the beginning. She turned to Victor. We'll finish this, she said, her voice steady. But tonight, we've won. Chapter 5. The Final Battle. The once menacing darkness of the lair had been shattered by the destruction of the altar, and yet the threat was far from over. The chamber, now silent except for the faint echo of their breathing, felt unnaturally still. Selina's heart raced, her body worn from the battle, but there was a fire in her chest, a sense of purpose that kept her moving forward. Lily clung to her, her small frame trembling, but still alive. Selina brushed a lock of hair from her sister's face, relief flooding her as she realized that Lily had escaped the worst of the horrors. Victor stepped beside her, his face hard, but his eyes burning with determination. It's not over yet, Selina. Malakar's not going to take this defeat lightly. He'll be back, and with more forces. Selina nodded, the weight of the truth settling over her. I know. We need to leave, get to safety, but we can't go empty-handed. Victor's gaze shifted to the room behind them, the many cages filled with the terrified townsfolk who had been imprisoned by the Blood Clan. We'll rescue them, every one of them, he said, as Selina turned to her sister, She could sense the change in the air. There was a low rumble, a vibration in the stone beneath their feet. She raised her sword, instinctively preparing for another attack. Malachar had returned. From the shadows, the vampire lord emerged, his armor dark and gleaming under the dim torchlight. His eyes glowed with an unholy rage, and his fangs were bared. But something was different about him. He had drawn on whatever remaining power he could muster. The blood moon had waned, but it hadn't completely disappeared. "You think you've won?" Malachar's voice was icy, filled with venom. "I will not be undone so easily. You'll regret this, Selina." His form shimmered, and the temperature in the room seemed to drop, as if the very air was thickening with darkness. Victor stepped in front of Selina, ready to fire his crossbow. "Stay back," he said, voice low and steady. "We'll deal with him." Selina shook her head, stepping beside him. "No, Victor, this ends now." Malachar raised his hand, summoning shadowy tendrils that snaked toward them. The air crackled as the shadows reached out, grasping for their throats. But Selina was faster. She dashed forward, slicing through the dark energy with her silver blade. The tendrils recoiled, but Malachar's sinister laughter echoed through the room, louder than before. "You think you can fight me?" he hissed. "I am eternal. You're nothing but a fleeting shadow, Selina." But Selina wasn't afraid anymore. The power inside her that had awakened in the forest burned brighter now. She didn't know what it was, something ancient, something powerful, but she knew it was hers to wield. She could feel it thrumming through her veins, a force that connected her to the very earth beneath her feet. "I'm not afraid of you," Selina said through clenched teeth. "I've already beaten you once. I'll do it again." In a flash of motion, she lunged at him, the silver sword glowing as it cut through the air. Malachar tried to strike back, his claws extended and his eyes burning with fury. But Selina moved with precision and speed, her sword striking his chest, cutting through his dark armor. Malachar screamed in agony, his body staggering back as if the very light of the sword was burning him from the inside out. He fell to his knees, the air around him crackling with the remnants of his power. Victor fired a bolt directly at Malachar's heart, the silver-tipped weapon piercing through his chest with a sickening thud. Malachar's eyes widened in shock as the bolt drove deep into him, and for a brief moment he froze, his power faltering. Selina stepped forward, her face set in determination. "This is where it ends," she whispered, raising her sword. With one final swing, she plunged the blade into his heart, sealing his fate. The vampire lord let out a last bone-chilling scream before he disintegrated into a pile of ash, the power that once radiated from him dissipating into the air like smoke. The room fell silent once more. The remaining vampires, without their leader, crumbled into dust, their bodies collapsing into nothingness. Selina stood, breathing heavily, her sword still gripped tightly in her hand. Her heart was racing, but the adrenaline of the fight was slowly ebbing away, leaving behind a profound sense of relief. Victor approached, lowering his crossbow. "It's over," he said quietly. "We did it." Selina nodded, her eyes finding Lily once more. Her sister had survived the worst of the horrors, and now they were free. The town had been saved, and the vampire's reign of terror had come to an end. But as Selina looked around the ruined lair, she knew the battle had only just begun. There were still other clans out there, still threats to the world they had known. And Selina, now more than ever, understood that her fight wasn't just for her family, it was for the survival of humanity itself. "I'll be ready for whatever comes next," Selina said softly, her voice filled with resolve. "This isn't over. Not yet." Victor gave a small, knowing smile. "You'll make sure it doesn't happen again, won't you?" Selina looked at her sister, now awake and safe in her arms. "I will, no matter what." The final battle had been fought, but Selina knew her journey was far from over. With the darkness of the Blood Clan behind them, she would continue to hunt the creatures that lurked in the shadows, fighting for a future free of their curse. And as the first light of dawn began to break through the dark sky, Selina stood ready, her sword gleaming in the early morning light, prepared for whatever awaited her next.